Hey LCA, 7th grade, I miss you. Today we're going to talk about the last chapter in our history book that we will cover this year. But before we get started on that, I would like to introduce you to two people who were very instrumental in bringing World War II to a close. Our first guest will be Virginia Hall, and we will actually be tuning in to a talk show that she was a guest on, and it is called Tim Talks. So here we go to Tim Talks.
Hello, Bethany Einstein here, reporting live to you. Thank you. Oh my goodness, Virginia Halls is here for an interview. Back to you, Tim.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's session of Tim Talks, where we are featuring World War II era veterans and people who had impacts on our society in the war. And today's special guest is Virginia Hall, America's female spy. So, Virginia, I want to ask you so much about your wartime experience, but I need to know a little bit about you. So tell me about your childhood and all.
Well, I was born in April. I was born April 6th, 1906 in Baltimore, Maryland. And that's kind of where I grew up around Maryland until I studied at Bernard College. It's a private women's school for arts in New York City. And then I decided I wanted to help serve my country in any way that I could, so I went to the American University in Washington, D.C.
Fascinating. So what about your studies led you to France and Germany and all of that?
Well, I wanted to learn German, Italian, and French. So I decided to study at France and Paris. I became part of the ambulance service unit of France, and this was all in Paris. And so yeah.
And that led you to working with the French resistance at some point?
Well, so when the Germans invaded France during World War II, the Second World War, I fled to Great Britain, to London, and there they sent me back to France as a spy with the code name Mary, as a New York reporter. And when I got back from France to London, I became part of the SOE.
That's the Special Operations
Yes.
Executive, I believe, right?
Yes, in Britain.
There is the precursor, excuse me, to their MI6 of today.
Yes. So I ended up going back to France in 1944, and they sent me there to become part of the French resistance. And when I got there were Gestapos and stuff like that, so I had to get past that, and later I learned that they called me the lady with the limp.
Well, now explain. Let's pause the war stories for a minute
Okay.
and explain the lady with a limp to me. Do you have an interesting anecdote you might share?
Well, I had a little accident before I became a spy.
Can you share?
Fine. Yes. Well, I was walking through the woods of Turkey, bird hunting. I was not hunting for turkey, it was in the country Turkey. And I tripped over nature and I shot myself in the leg. And they had to amputate from the knee down, so I named it Cuthbert.
Now, to be clear, you named your artificial leg Cuthbert or the part they threw away Cuthbert?
Nope, my artificial one, Cuthbert.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. Cuthbert.
And that became part of my legacy.
Oh my goodness. Well, we will get back to that in a second. I understand, speaking of your legacy, that your service to the Allies was invaluable, and that as representative of that, the United States government awarded you the Distinguished Service Cross, only one given to a female civilian. The British made you an honorary knight, member of the British Empire.
They did.
And it escapes me, the French did something.
Portier.
Yes.
Portier, yes.
Okay.
Which is one of their highest
Well, it is, and that in itself is a defined legacy. But talk for a minute to that young lady out there today, the young high school student, middle school student who's thinking about what they're going to do. What would you want them to see as your legacy?
Well, I never really wanted to be known as famous. I never wanted to be put in that category. But I did want to save my country and help save the lives of some of our citizens. So, but once I got those awards, I realized that maybe it could help people. So I would want to tell that young girl or someone like that to follow their dreams.
Well, that is an amazing and admirable story. Anything else you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
Well, I was part of the CIA, and
Oh, it's your retirement. You retired from the CIA.
I retired from the CIA. Yes, I did. And I retired from the CIA in 1966.
Amazing. From the late 30s to the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Such a turbulent time and pivotal time for our world.
Yes.
And you played a part in it.
I was very happy to, yes.
Virginia Hall, thank you very much.
Yes.
Come back to see us. Stay safe out there. Tim out.
All right, and next we will go to our correspondent Maddie Winfrey, who is with Oscar Schindler today. Maddie?
Thanks, Miss Shackelford. It's Maddie here, guys, and today I'm going to be interviewing Oscar Schindler. So come on out, Oscar. So today I'm going to be asking him a few questions just about World War II and what he did in it and what he did about it. So the first question is, when and where were you born? Very simple.
I was born on April 28th in 1908 in Austria-Hungary.
Very cool. Next question. Did you attend trade schools when you were younger? And if you did you enjoy it?
I did. I enjoyed it to some degree. There were some ups and downs.
Yes. Next, are you Catholic?
I am, among many religions.
Who did you marry in 1928?
I married Amelia Peltz.
And did you enjoy your wedding?
I did. It was a brief wedding. Not a lot of people.
Yes. And is it correct that you worked in the office of the military Foreign Intelligence Armed Forces in 1936?
I did. It was a very wonderful job.
And didn't you join the Nazi Party in 1939?
I did.
And when you moved to Cairo, you opened a factory where you employed Jews. What was that factory called?
It's called Amalia.
And did you employ Jews there, or was it just other people?
Well, we employed over 1,000 Jews of over like a max of 1,700 people.
Wow. And during your ownership of Amalia, were you ever arrested or charged with any crimes?
Yes, I was arrested 3 times, but never charged with anything.
And what was the highest point of Amalia?
Like I was talking about earlier with the how we were able to employ 1,700 people, but it was amazing because over 1,000 of them were Jews.
Incredible. Next, is it true that you saved over 12,000 Jews from going to the hardest concentration camp?
It is.
And my last question for you is, why did you save the Jews? I mean, you were part of the Nazi Party. You didn't have to do it. You could have just ignored it like a lot of other people. Why did you choose not to, and why did you help people?
That is a very good question because, one, I have no reason to help them because I am in the Nazi Party. But second of all, I saved them because, one, I saw how badly they were being treated, like just everyday people like you and me. Like, they have no right to be disrespected and tortured like that.
That is absolutely incredible. Thank you, Oscar, for coming to this interview. Enjoy the rest of your day, and back to you, Ms. Shackelford.
All right, I'm sure as you know by now, by the end of World War II, that the Russians who helped us out as we were ending the war were actually ideologically following the teachings of Lenin and also Stalin, and we call that communism, all right? in communism is very different from the way we think about things in America. Here we focus on the ideology called capitalism. And in capitalism, our government takes the considerations of the individual into account as they make laws and policies that run our country. So a private individual is allowed to own his own business and sell his goods to customers for a profit. This does not happen in communism. In communism, the government owns and runs everything and sets standards by which those things will happen. Now, that means that the individual has no say in politics. The big problem that was happening as World War II ended and communism was really surging ahead was that Stalin and his government were focused more on the military than on the individual people within their countries. And so all of the goods, all of the funding went to make the military larger. Because remember, at the end of World War II, they had captured some German scientists, they had spies coming to America, and so they were in the process of trying to build their own atom bombs. And the lands that Stalin took became part of the Soviet Union, whereas the rest of the lands that that America and Britain and France were looking over were given mostly independence. Okay. Now, what happened because of this was that Berlin, the city, was actually completely inside of Russian territory that had been taken over by communism in the Soviet Union after the war. And they decided that they didn't want goods and services coming in from the West, from the good countries, into Berlin. And so they just shut it off. They cut off all the transportation. They wouldn't allow any food, any goods to come into the country and to the city of Berlin. And so the people were beginning to starve there. We didn't want to start another war, and so they came up with the idea that's called the Berlin Airlift. This happened over about 11 months in 1948, and it took over 250,000 flights, but they were able to just land. Jeeps would come up, get all the food and other goods out of the planes, and then the pilots would take off again. And this was successful. As well as it was going on, the pilots would drop candy with little parachutes out the windows, I guess, of their planes. And that was called Little Vittles, is what they called the candy parachutes that were dropping. So no war happened. At the end of the 11 months, Stalin finally released the blockades, and they were able to just take care of themselves within Berlin. All right, jumping ahead about 5 years to October 4th, 1957. This was when the space race was going on, and unfortunately the Soviets won. They were able to launch Sputnik, which was the first man-made craft to orbit the Earth. This was very upsetting to America, and we really ramped up our program after that because we wanted to get ahead. And shortly after that, we did, through President Kennedy, establish NASA, and we were the first to get a man on the moon. All right, then jumping ahead again to 1962, the communists have been busy getting their atom bombs and a nuclear program established. And we talked about how that got started after the war. But what happened in 62 was that we were flying reconnaissance over Cuba and realized that they were building missile bases there. And then we found out that they were actually placing nuclear missiles there, which is only 110 miles from Florida. So this was a very scary time for America. And the last thing that I want to point out in this Cuban Missile Crisis, you're going to do a little bit of reading on it in a section called the Bay of Pigs, I believe. But I did want to point out that one of the spy planes that was flying over in October of 1962 to do reconnaissance, to see what all activity the Soviets had done at that time, was shot down. And that's where we will end today's lesson. Thanks. Miss you guys.